Dedication, Foreword, and Glossary of Over the Top. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This recording is by Mark Smith of Simpsonville, South Carolina. Over the Top by an American Soldier Who Went by Arthur Guy Empey, machine gunner, serving in France together with Tommy's Dictionary of the Trenches. This book will be split into two sections. In the first two files, Tommy's Dictionary of the Trenches, which is really a glossary of terms, will be presented. If you are already familiar with military lingo, and specifically that of the British soldier, then you could probably skip this and go straight to the third file. On the other hand, you may want to stick with the glossary, because it does pick up terms that are specific to the British Army, and also Empey treats his subject with humor as he sees these things through the eyes of a British Tommy, or soldier. Dedication to my mother and my sister. I have had many good comrades as I have journeyed around the world, before the mast and in the trenches, but loyal and true as they were, none have ever done, or could ever do, as much as you have done for me. So as a little token of my gratitude for your love and sacrifice, I dedicate this book to you. Foreword. During 16 years of "roughing it," knocking around the world, I have nibbed against the high and low and have had ample opportunity of studying, at close range, many different people, their ideas, political and otherwise, their hopes and principles. Through this elbow rubbing, and not from reading, I have become convinced of the nobility, truth, and justice of the Allies' cause, and know their fight to be our fight, because it espouses the principles of the United States of America, democracy, justice, and liberty. To the average American who has not lived and fought with him, the Englishman appears to be distant, reserved, a slow thinker, and lacking in humor. But from my association with the man who inhabits the British Isles, I find that this opinion is unjust. To me, Tommy Atkins has proved himself to be the best of mates, a pal, and bubbling over with a fine sense of humor, a man with a just cause who is willing to sacrifice everything but honor in the advancement of the same. It is my fondest hope that Uncle Sam and John Bull, arms locked, as mates, good and true, each knowing and appreciating the worth of the other, will wend their way through the years to come, happy and contented in each other's company. So if this poor attempt of mine will, in any way, help to bring Tommy Atkins closer to the doorstep of Uncle Sam, my ambition will have been realized. Perhaps to some of my readers it will appear that I have written of a great and just cause in a somewhat flippant manner, but I assure them such was not my intention. I have tried to tell my experiences in the language of Tommy sitting on the fire step of a front line trench on the Western Front, just as he would tell his mate next him what was happening at a different part of the line. Signed, A.G.E., New York City, May, 1917. Tommy's Dictionary of the Trenches, Part 1. In this so-called dictionary I've tried to list most of the pet terms and slangy definitions which Tommy Atkins uses 1,000 times a day as he is serving in France. I have gathered them as I lived with him in the trenches and rest billets, and later in the hospitals in England where I met men from all parts of the line. The definitions are not official, of course. Tommy is not a sentimental sort of animal, so some of his definitions are not exactly complimentary, but he is not cynical and does not mean to offend anyone higher up. It is just a sort of ragging or kidding, as the American would say, that helps him pass the time away. Slang terms, sayings, phrases, etc. About turn. A military command similar to "about face" or "to the rear march," Tommy's nickname for Heberturn, a point on the British line. Adjutant. The name given to an officer who helps the colonel do something. He rides a horse, and you see him at guard mounting and battalion parade. ADMS. The Assistant Director of Medical Service. Have never seen him, but he is supposed to help the DMS and pass on cases where Tommy is posted as unfit for trench service. Aerial Torpedo. A kind of trench mortar shell, guaranteed by the makers to break up Fritz's supper of sausages and beer, even though said supper is in a dugout 30 feet down. Sometimes it lives up to its reputation. Alarm. A signal given in the trenches that the enemy is about to attack, frequently false. It is mainly used to break up Tommy's dreams of home. All-around traverse. A machine gun so placed that its fire can be turned in any direction. Allemand. A French term meaning German. Tommy uses it because he thinks it is a swear word. Allotment. A certain sum Tommy allows to his family. Allumettes. French term for what they sell to Tommy as matches, the sulphurous fumes from which have been known to gas a whole platoon. Ammo. Rifle ammunition, used to add weight to Tommy's belt. He carries 120 rounds at all times, except when he buries it under the straw in his billet before going on a route march. In the trenches he expends it in the direction of Berlin. Ammo depot. A place where ammunition is stored. It is especially useful in making enemy airmen waste bombs trying to hit it. Ammonal. A high explosive used in the Mills bomb. The Germans are more able than Tommy to discourse on its effects. Any complaints? A useless question asked by an inspecting officer when he makes the rounds of billets or Tommy's meals. A complaining Tommy generally lands on the crime sheet. It is only recruits who complain, the old men just sigh with disgust. AOC. The Army Ordnance Corps. A department which deals out supplies to the troops. Its chief asset is the returning of requisitions because a comma is misplaced. APM. Assistant Provost Marshal. An officer at the head of the military police. His headquarters are generally out of reach of the enemy's guns. His chief duties are to ride around in a motor car and wear a red band around his cap. Après la guerre. Means after the war. Tommy's definition of heaven. ASC. Army Service Corps, or Army Safety Corps as Tommy calls it, the members of which bring up supplies to the rear of the line. Back of the line. Any place behind the firing line out of range of enemy guns. Bailer. A scoop affair for bailing out water from the trenches and dugouts. As the trenches generally drain the surrounding landscape, the sun has to be appealed to before the job is completed. Bantams. Men under the standard army height of 5 feet 3 inches. They are in a separate organization called the Bantam Battalion, and although undersized have the opinion that they can lick the whole German army. Barbed wire. A lot of prickly wire entwined around stakes driven in front of the trenches. This obstruction is supposed to prevent the Germans from taking lodgings in your dugouts. It also affords the enemy artillery rare sport trying to blow it up. Barndook. Tommy's nickname for his rifle. He uses it because it is harder to say and spell than rifle. Barrage. Concentrated shell fire on a sector of the German line. In the early days of the war, when ammunition was defective, it often landed on Tommy himself. Barricade. An obstruction of sandbags to impede the enemy's traffic into your trench. You build it up and he promptly knocks it down, so what's the use? Bashed in. Smashed by a shell, generally applied to a trench or dugout. Batman. A man who volunteers to clean a non-commissioned officer's buttons, but who never volunteers for a trench raid. He ranks next to a worm. Bayonet. A sort of knife-like contrivance which fits on the end of your rifle. The government issues it to stab Germans with. Tommy uses it to toast bread. Big boys. Large guns, generally 8-inch or above. Big push. The Battle of the Somme. He often calls it the 1st of July, the date on which it started. Big stuff. Large shells, 8-inch or over. Big Willie. Tommy's term for his personal friend, the Kaiser. Billet. Sometimes a regular house, but generally a stable where Tommy sleeps while behind the lines. It is generally located near a large manure pile. Most billets have numerous entrances, one for Tommy and the rest for rain, rats, wind, and shells. Billet guard. 3 men and a corporal who are posted to guard the billets of soldiers. They do this until the orderly officer has made his rounds at night, then they go to sleep. Biscuit. A concoction of flour and water, baked until very hard. Its original use was for building purposes, but Tommy is supposed to eat it. Tommy is no coward, but he balks at this. Biscuits make excellent fuel and give no smoke. Bivouac. A term given by Tommy to a sort of tent made out of waterproof sheets. Blastine. A high explosive which promotes Kultur in the German lines. Blighty. An East Indian term meaning over the seas. Tommy has adopted it as a synonym for home. He tries numerous ways of reaching Blighty, but the powers that be are wise to all of his attempts, so he generally fails. Blighty one. A wound serious enough to send Tommy to England. BMGC. Brigade Machine Gun Company. Composed of Vickers machine gunners. They always put their packs on a limber or small wagon while route marching, which fact greatly arouses the jealousy of Tommy. Body snatcher. Tommy's term for a sniper. Bomb. An infernal device filled with high explosive which you throw at the Germans. Its chief delight is to explode before it leaves your hand. Bomb store. A place where bombs are kept, built so the enemy cannot locate them with his fire. For that matter, Tommy can't either when he needs them. Bombing post. A sort of trench or sap running from your front line to within a few yards of the enemy's trench. It is occupied by bomb throwers who would like to sign an agreement with the Germans for neither side to throw bombs. Brag. A card game similar to poker at which every player quits a loser and no one wins, that is, according to the statements of the several players. Brazier. A sheet iron pot punched full of holes in which a fire is built. It is used to keep Tommy warm in his dugout until he becomes unconscious from its smoke and fumes. He calls it a fire bucket. Brigade guard. Several men who are detailed to guard brigade headquarters. They don't go to sleep. BSM. The Battalion Sergeant Major. The highest ranking non-commissioned officer in the battalion. A constant dread to Tommy when he has forgotten to polish his buttons or dubbin his boots. Bully beef. A kind of corned beef with tin round it. The unopened cans make excellent walls for dugouts. Berm. A narrow ledge cut along the walls of a trench to prevent earth from caving in. Berm to Tommy is a cuss word because he has to go over the top at night to construct it. Busted. Term applied when a non-commissioned officer is reduced by court-martial. Button stick. A contrivance made of brass 10 inches long which slides over the buttons and protects the tunic in cleaning. Called to the colors. A man on reserve who has been ordered to report for service. Camel Corps. Tommy's nickname for the infantry because they look like overloaded camels, and probably because they also go 8 days and longer without a drink, that is, of the real stuff. Candle. A piece of wick surrounded by wax or tallow used for lighting purposes. One candle among 6 men is the general issue. Canister. A German trench mortar shell filled with scraps of iron and nails. Tommy really has a great contempt for this little token of German affection, and he uses the nails to hang his equipment on in the dugouts. Canteen. A mess tin issued to Tommy, who after dinner generally forgets to wash it, and pinches his mates for tea in the evening. Carry on. Resume. Keep on with what you are doing. Go ahead. Carrying in. Machine gunner's term for taking guns, ammunition, etc. into the front line trench. Caterpillar. Is not a bug, but the name given to a powerful engine used to haul the big guns over rough roads. CCS. Casualty Clearing Station. A place where the doctors draw lots to see if Tommy is badly wounded enough to be sent to Blighty. Chalk pit. A white spot on a painted landscape used at the machine gunners' school to train would-be gunners in picking out distinctive objects in landscapes and guessing ranges. Challenge. A question, "Who goes there?" thrown at an unknown moving object by a sentry in the darkness, who hopes that said moving object will answer, "Friend." Char. A black poisonous brew which Tommy calls tea. Chevaux de frise. Barbed wire defenses against cavalry. Chucking his weight about. Self-important. Generally applied to a newly promoted non-commissioned officer or a recruit airing his knowledge. Chum. An endearing word used by Tommy to his mate when he wants to borrow something or have a favor done. Clicked it. Got killed. Up against it. Wounded. Clock. Trench speak for the face. Coal box. The name for a high explosive German shell fired from a 5.9 howitzer which emits a heavy black smoke and makes Tommy's hair stand on end. Coal fatigue. A detail on which Tommy has to ride in a limber and fill 2 sacks with coal. It takes him exactly 4 hours to do this. He always misses morning parade but manages to get back in time for dinner. Coal. Tommy's nickname for a penny. It buys 1 glass of French beer. Coming it. Trying to put something over. Coming the ad. Boasting, lying about something. Communication trench. A zigzag ditch leading from the rear to the front line trench, through which reinforcements, reliefs, ammunition, and rations are brought up. Its real use is to teach Tommy how to swear and how to wade through mud up to his knees. Communiqué. An official report which is published daily by the different warring governments for the purpose of kidding the public. They don't kid Tommy. Company stores. The Quartermaster Sergeant's headquarters where stores are kept. A general hangout for batmen, officers' servants, and NCOs. Compré. Tommy's French for "Do you understand?" Universally used in the trenches. Conscript. A man who tried to wait until the war was over before volunteering for the army, but was balked by the government. Consolidate captured line. Digging in or preparing a captured position for defense against a counter-attack. Convalescence. 6 weeks rest allotted to a wounded Tommy. During this time the government is planning where they will send Tommy to be wounded a second time. C of E. The Church of England. This is stamped on Tommy's identification disc. He has to attend church parade whether or not he wants to go to heaven. Cook. A soldier detailed to spoil Tommy's rations. He is generally picked because he was a blacksmith in civil life. Cooties. Unwelcome inhabitants of Tommy's shirt. Counterattack. A disagreeable habit of the enemy which makes Tommy realize that after capturing a position the hardest work is to hold it. Covering party. A number of men detailed to lie down in front of a working party while out in front, to prevent surprise and capture by German patrols. Tommy loves this job, I don't think. Crater. A large circular hole in the ground made by the explosion of a mine. According to official communiques, Tommy always occupies a crater with great credit to himself, but sometimes the Germans get there first. Cricket ball. The name given to a bomb the shape and size of a cricket ball. Tommy does not use it to play cricket with. Crime sheet. A useless piece of paper on which is kept a record of Tommy's misdemeanors. Crump. A name given by Tommy to a high explosive German shell which when it bursts makes a crump sort of noise. C.S.M. The Company Sergeant Major, the head non-commissioned officer of a company, whose chief duty is to wear a crown on his arm, a couple of Boer War ribbons on his chest, and to put Tommy's name and number on the crime sheet. Curtain fire. A term applied by the artillery to a wall of shell fire on the enemy communication trenches, to prevent the bringing up of men and supplies, and also to keep our own front lines from wavering. But somehow or other, men and supplies manage to leak through it. Cushy. Easy, comfortable, pretty soft. D.A.C. The Divisional Ammunition Column. A collection of men, horses, and limbers, which supplies ammunition for the line and keeps Tommy awake while in billets with their infernal noise. They are like owls, always working at night. D.C.M. The Distinguished Conduct Medal. A piece of bronze which a soldier gets for being foolish. D.C.P. The Divisional Concert Party. An aggregation of would-be actors who inflict their talents on Tommy at half a franc per head. Defaulter. Not an absconding cashier, but a Tommy who has been sentenced to extra pack drill for breathing while on parade or doing some other little thing like that. Deco. To look, a look at something. Detonator. A contrivance in a bomb containing fulminate of mercury, which, ignited by a fuse, explodes the charge. De-roughs. Derzosuffs. Tommy's French for 2 eggs. Dial. Another term of Tommy's for his map, or face. Digging in. Digging trenches and dugouts in a captured position. Digging party. A detail of men told off to dig trenches, graves, or dugouts. Tommy is not particular as to which he has to dig, it's the actual digging he objects to. Dinner up. Dinner is ready. Divisional band. Another devilish aggregation which wastes most of its time in practicing and polishing its instruments. Dixie. An iron pot with 2 handles on it in which Tommy's meals are cooked. Its real efficiency lies in the fact that when carrying it, your puttees absorb all the black grease on its sides. Doing them in. Killing them. Cutting up a body of German troops. Donkey. An army mule, an animal for which Tommy has the greatest respect. He never pets or in any way becomes familiar with said mule. Draft. A contingent of new men sent as reinforcements for the trenches. Tommy takes special delight in scaring these men with tales of his own experiences which he never had. Draftsman. A member of a draft who listens to and believes Tommy's weird tales of trench warfare. Dressing station. A medical post where Tommy gets his wounds attended to, if he is lucky enough to get wounded. He is lucky because a wound means Blighty. Drill order. Rifle, belt, bayonet, and respirator. Dry canteen. An army store where Tommy may buy cigarettes, chocolate, and tinned fruit, that is, if he has any money. D.S.O. Distinguished Service Order. Another piece of metal issued to officers for being brave. Tommy says it is mostly won in dugouts and calls it a dugout service order. Dubbin. A grease for boots. Dud. A German shell or bomb which has not exploded on account of a defective fuse. Tommy is a great souvenir collector, so he gathers these duds. Sometimes when he tries to unscrew the nose cap it sticks. Then in his hurry to confiscate it before an officer appears, he doesn't hammer it just right, and the printer of the casualty list has to use a little more type. Dugout. A deep hole in the trenches dug by the Royal Engineer Corps, supposed to be shell-proof. It is, until a shell hits it. Rat and Tommy find it an excellent habitation in which to contract rheumatism. Dump. An uncovered spot where trench tools and supplies are placed. It is uncovered so that these will become rusty and worthless from the elements. This so that the contractors at home won't starve. Du pain. Tommy's French for bread. Efficiency pay. Extra pay allowed by the government for long service. Tommy is very efficient if he manages to get it from the government. 18-pounder. One of our guns which fires an 18-pound shell, used for destroying German barbed wire previous to an attack. If it does its duty, you bet Tommy is grateful to the 18-pounders. Elephant dugout. A large, safe, and roomy dugout braced by heavy steel ribs or girders. Emplacement. A position made of earth or sandbags from which a machine gun is fired. It is supposed to be invisible to the enemy. They generally blow it up in the course of a couple of days, just by luck, of course. Entrenching tool. A spade-like tool for digging hasty entrenchments. It takes about a week to dig a decent hole with it, so Hasty must have another meeting. Equipment on. Put on equipment for drill or parade. Escort. A guard of soldiers who conduct prisoners to different points. Tommy is just as liable to be a prisoner as an escort. Estaminet. A French public house or saloon where muddy water is sold for beer. Fag. Cigarette. Something Tommy is always touching you for. Fag issue. Army issue of cigarettes generally on Sunday. Fatigue. Various kinds of work done by Tommy while he is resting. Fed up. Disgusted, got enough of it, as the rich Mr. Hoggenheimer used to say, sufficiency. Field dressing. Bandages issued to soldiers for first aid when wounded. They use them for handkerchiefs and to clean their rifles. Field postcard. A card on which Tommy is allowed to tell his family and friends that he is alive. If he is dead, the War Office sends a card, sometimes. Field punishment No. 1. Official name for spread eagling a man on a limber wheel 2 hours a day for 21 days. His rations consist of bully beef, water, and biscuits. Tommy calls this punishment crucifixion, especially if he has undergone it. 15-pounder. Still another of ours. Shell weighs 15 pounds. Used for killing rats on the German parapets. Finding the range. Ascertaining by instrument or by trial shots the distance from an enemy objective. Fireworks. A night bombardment. Fire sector. A certain space of ground which a machine gun is supposed to sweep with its fire. If the gun refuses to work, all of the enemy who crossed this space are technically dead, according to the General's plans. Firing squad. 12 men picked to shoot a soldier who has been sentenced to death by court-martial. Tommy has no comment to make on this. Firing step. A ledge in the front trench which enables Tommy to fire over the top. In rainy weather you have to be an acrobat to even stand on it on account of the slippery mud. Fire trench. The front line trench. Another name is for hell. 5 rounds rapid. Generally, just before daylight in the trenches, the order 5 rounds rapid is given. Each man puts his rifle and head over the parapet and fires 5 shots as rapidly as possible in the direction of the German trenches and then ducks. A sort of "Good morning, have you used Fears soap?" 5.9. A German shell 5.9 inches in diameter. It is their standard shell. Tommy has no special love for this brand, but they are like olives, all right when you get used to them. Flags. Tommy's nickname for a signaler. Flare. A rocket fired from a pistol which, at night, lights up the ground in front of your trench. Flare pistol. A large pistol, which looks like a sawed-off shotgun, from which flares are fired. When you need this pistol badly, it has generally been left in your dugout. Flying column. A flying column of troops that waits from one point of the line to another. In case of need, they generally arrive at the wrong point. Fokker. A type of German aeroplane which the Boche claims to be the fastest in the world. Tommy believes this because our airmen seldom catch them. For it. On the crime sheet, up against a reprimand, on trial, in trouble. 4x2. A piece of flannel 4 inches by 2 issued by the Q.M. sergeant with which to "pull through." 4.5. Another of ours. The German don't like this one. 4.7. One of our shells 4.7 inches in diameter. Tommy likes this kind. Fritz. Tommy's name for a German. He loves a German like poison. Front line. The nearest trench to the enemy. No place for a conscientious objector. Frostbite. A quick road to Blighty, which Tommy used very often until frostbite became a court-martial offense. Now he keeps his feet warm. Full pack. A soldier carrying all of his equipment. Full corporal. An NCO who sports 2 stripes on his arm and has more to say than the colonel. Fumigator. An infernal device at a hospital which cooks Tommy's uniform and returns it to him 2 sizes too small. Funk hole. Tommy's term for a dugout. A favorite spot for those of a nervous disposition. Fuse. A part of a shell or bomb which burns in a set time and ignites the detonator. Gas. Poisonous fumes which the Germans send over to our trenches. When the wind is favorable, this gas is discharged into the air from huge cylinders. The wind carries it over towards our lines. It appears like a huge yellowish-green cloud rolling along the ground. The alarm is sounded and Tommy promptly puts on his gas helmet and laughs at the Boche. Gas gong. An empty shell case hung up in the trenches and in billets. A sentry is posted near it so that in case German poison gas comes over, he can give the alarm by striking this gong with an iron bar. If the sentry happens to be asleep, we get gassed. Gassed. A soldier who has been overcome from the fumes of German poison gas or the hot air of a comrade. Gassing. A term Tommy applies to shooting the bull. Getting a sub. Touching an officer for money. To be taken out of soldier's pay on the next payday. Getting the sparks. Bullets from a machine gun cutting enemy barbed wire at night. When a bullet strikes wire it generally throws off a bluish spark. Machine gunners use this method at night to set their guns so that its fire will command the enemy's trench. Ginger. Nickname of a red-bearded soldier. Courage, or pep. Jippo. Bacon grease, soup. GMP. The Garrison Military Police. Soldiers detailed to patrol the roads and regulate traffic behind the lines. Tommy's pet aversion. GOC. General Officer Commanding. Tommy never sees him in the act of commanding, but has the opportunity of reading many an order signed GOC. Goggles. An apparatus made of canvas and mica which is worn over the eyes for protection from the gases of German tear shells. The only time Tommy cries is when he forgets his goggles or misses the issue. Going in. Taking over trenches. Going out. Relieved from the trenches. Gone west. Killed or died. Gooseberries. A wooden frame in the shape of a cask, wrapped round with barbed wire. These gooseberries are thrown into the barbed wire entanglements to help make them impassable. Got the crown. Promoted to sergeant major. Green envelope. An envelope of a green color issued to Tommy once a week. The contents will not be censored regimentally, but are liable to censor at the base. On the outside of envelope appears the following certificate, which Tommy must sign. I certify on my honor that the contents of this envelope refer to nothing but private and family matters. After signing this certificate, Tommy immediately writes about everything but family and private matters. Groom. A soldier who looks after an officer's horse and who robs said horse of its hay. He makes his own bed comfortable with his hay. Grousing. A scientific grumbling in which Tommy cusses everything in general and offends no one. GSW. Gunshot wound. When Tommy is wounded he does not care whether it is a GSW or a kick from a mule, just so he gets back to Blighty. GS wagon. A four-wheeled wagon driven by an ASC driver. It carries supplies such as food, ammunition, trench tools, and timber for dugouts. When Tommy gets sore feet he is allowed to ride on this wagon and fills the ears of the driver with tales of his wonderful exploits. Occasionally one of these drivers believes him. Gum boots. Rubber boots issued to Tommy for wet trenches. They are used to keep his feet dry. They do when he is lucky enough to get a pair. Gumming the game. Spoiling anything, interfering. Hairbrush. Name of a bomb used in the earlier stages of the war. It is shaped like a hairbrush and is thrown by the handle. Tommy used to throw them over to the Germans for their morning toilette. Hand grenade. A general term for a bomb which is thrown by hand. Tommy looks upon all bombs with grave suspicion. From long experience he has learned not to trust them, even if the detonator has been removed. Hardtails. Mules. Haversack. A canvas bag forming part of Tommy's equipment, carried on the left side. Its original use was intended for the carrying of emergency rations and small kit. It is generally filled with a miscellaneous assortment of tobacco, pipes, bread crumbs, letters, and a lot of useless souvenirs. Having a doss. Having a sleep. Hold all. A small canvas roll in which you are supposed to carry your razor, comb, knife, fork, spoon, mirror, soap, toothbrush, etc. Tommy takes great care of the above because it means extra pack drill to come on parade unshaven. Holy Joe. Tommy's familiar but not necessarily irreverent name for the chaplain. He really has a great admiration for this officer, who although not a fighting man, so often risks his life to save a wounded Tommy. Housewife. A neat little package of needles, thread, extra shoelaces and buttons. When a button comes off Tommy's trousers, instead of going to his housewife, he looks around for a nail. Hun. Another term for a German, mostly used by war correspondents. Hun pinching. Raiding German trenches for prisoners. Identification disc. A little fiber disc which is worn around the neck by means of a string. On one side is stamped your name, rank, regimental number, and regiment, while on the other side is stamped your religion. If at any time Tommy is doubtful of his identity, he looks at his disc to reassure himself. I'm sorry. Tommy's apology. If he pokes your eye out with his bayonet, he says, "I'm sorry," and the matter is ended so far as he is concerned. In front. Over the top, in front of the front line trench, in no man's land. In reserve. Troops occupying positions, billets, or dugouts, immediately in rear of the front line, who in case of an attack will support the firing line. Intelligence Department. Secret Service men who are supposed to catch spies, or be spies as the occasion demands. Interpreter. A fat job with a return ticket, held by a soldier who thinks he can speak a couple of languages. He questions prisoners as to the color of their grandmother's eyes and why they joined the army. Just imagine asking a German why he joined the army. Invalided. Sent to England on account of sickness. Iron rations. A tin of bully beef, 2 biscuits, and a tin containing tea, sugar, and oxo cubes. These are not supposed to be eaten until you die of starvation. Isolated post. An advanced part of a trench or position where 1 or 2 sentries are posted to guard against a surprise attack. While in this post Tommy is constantly wondering what the Germans will do with his body. "It's good we have a navy." One of Tommy's expressions when he is disgusted with the army and its work. Jack Johnson. A 17-inch German shell, probably called Jack Johnson because the Germans thought that with it they could lick the world. Jackknife. A knife, issued to Tommy, which weighs a stone and won't cut. Its only virtue is the fact that it has a tin opener attachment which won't open tins. Jam. A horrible mess of fruit and sugar which Tommy spreads on his bread. It all tastes the same no matter whether labeled strawberry or green gage. Jam tin. A crude sort of hand grenade which, in the early stages of the war, Tommy used to manufacture out of jam tins, ammonal, and mud. The manufacturer generally would receive a little wooden cross in recognition of the fact that he died for king and country. Jock. Universal name for a Scotchman. Kick the bucket. Died. Kilo. 5/8 of a mile. 10 kilos generally means a trek of 15 miles. King's shilling. Tommy's rate of pay per day, perhaps. Taking the king's shilling means enlisting. Kip. Tommy's term for sleep. He also calls his bed his kip. It is on guard that Tommy most desires to kip. Kit bag. A part of Tommy's equipment in which he is supposed to pack up his troubles and smile according to the words of a popular song. The composer was never in a trench. Kitchener's Army. The volunteer army raised by Lord Kitchener, the members of which signed for a duration of war. They are commonly called the New Army or Kitchener's Mob. At first the regulars and territorials looked down on them, but now accept them as welcome mates. Labor Battalion. An organization which is too proud to fight. They would sooner use a pick and shovel. Lance Corporal. An NCO 1 grade above a private who wears a shoestring stripe on his arm and thinks the war should be run according to his ideas. Lead. The leading pair of horses or mules on a limber. Their only fault is that they won't lead if they happen to be mules. Leave train. The train which takes Tommy to one of the seaports on the Channel en route to Blighty when granted leave. The worst part of going on leave is coming back. Lee Enfield. Name of the rifle used by the British Army. Its caliber is .303 and the magazine holds 10 rounds. When dirty, it has a tasty habit of getting Tommy's name on the crime sheet. Legging it. Means running away. Lewis gun. A rifle-like machine gun, air-cooled, which only carries 47 rounds in its pie plate magazine. Under fire when this magazine is emptied you shout for ammo, but perhaps number 2, the ammo carrier, is lying in the rear with a bullet through his napper. Then it's "Napoo Fini," Tommy's French for Mr. Lewis. Light duty. What the doctor marks on the sick report opposite a Tommy's name when he has doubts as to whether said Tommy is putting one over on him. Usually Tommy is. Light Railway. Two thin iron tracks on which small flat cars full of ammunition and supplies are pushed. These railways afford Tommy great sport in the loading, pushing, and unloading of cars. Limber. A matchbox on two wheels which gives the army mule a job. It also carries officers' packs. Liquid fire. Another striking example of German Kultur. According to the Germans it is supposed to annihilate whole brigades, but Tommy refuses to be annihilated. Listening post. 2 or 3 men detailed to go out in front at night to lie on the ground and listen for any undue activity in the German lines. They also listen for the digging of mines. It is nervous work, and when Tommy returns he generally writes for a box of phosphorine tablets, a widely advertised nerve tonic. Little Willie. Tommy's nickname for the German Crown Prince. They are not on speaking terms. Lloyd George's pets. Munition workers in England. Lonely soldier. A soldier who advertises himself as lonely through the medium of some English newspaper. If he is clever and diplomatic by this method he generally receives 2 or 3 parcels a week, but he must be careful not to write to 2 girls living on the same block, or his parcel post mail will diminish. Lonely Stab. A girl who writes and sends parcels to Tommy. She got his name from the Lonely Soldier column of some newspaper. Loophole. A disguised aperture in a trench through which to snipe at Germans. Lyddite. A high explosive used in shells. Has a habit of scattering bits of anatomy over the landscape. This is the end of the first part of the glossary. See the next file for part 2. Part 2 of the glossary for Over the Top. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Over the Top by Arthur Empey. This is Tommy's Dictionary of the Trenches, Part 2. MGC. Machine Gun Corps. A collection of machine gunners who think they are the deciding factor of the war and that artillery is unnecessary. MG. Machine Gunner. A man who, like an American policeman, is never there when he is badly wanted. Maconochie. A ration of meat, vegetables, and soapy water contained in a tin. Mr. Maconochie, the chemist who compounded this mess, intends to commit hara-kiri before the boys return from the front. He is wise. Mad Minute. Firing 15 rounds from your rifle in 60 seconds. A man is mad to attempt it, especially with a stiff bolt. Mail bag. A canvas bag which is used to bring the other fellow's mail around. Major. An officer in a battalion who wears a crown on his uniform, is in command of 2 companies, and corrects said companies in the second position of "present arms." He also resides in a dugout. Maneuvers. Useless evolutions of troops conceived by someone higher up to show Tommy how brave his officers are and how battles should be fought. The enemy never attend these maneuvers to prove they're right. Mass Formation. A close order formation in which the Germans attack. It gives them a sort of "come on, I'm with you" feeling. They would hold hands only for the fact that they have to carry their rifles. Tommy takes great delight in busting up these gatherings. Mate. A soldier with whom Tommy is especially chummy. Generally picked because this soldier receives a parcel from home every week. Maxim. Type of machine gun which has been supplanted by the Vickers in order to make Tommy unlearn what he has been taught about the Maxim. MT. Mechanical Transport, the members of which are ex-taxi drivers. No wonder Tommy's rations melt away when the MT carries them. M.O. Medical Officer. A doctor specially detailed to tell Tommy that he is not sick. M.D. What the doctor marks on the sicker or side report when he thinks Tommy is faking sickness. It means medicine and duty. Mentioned in dispatches. Recommended for bravery. Tommy would sooner be recommended for leave. Mercy Kamerad. What Fritz says when he has had a belly full of fighting and wants to surrender. Of late this has been quite a popular phrase with him, replacing the hymn of hate. Mess Orderly. A soldier detailed daily to carry Tommy's meals to and from the cookhouse. Mess Tin. An article of equipment used as a tea kettle and dinner set. Mike and George. KCMG, Knight Commander of the Order of St. Michael and St. George. An award for bravery in the field. Military Cross. A badge of honor dished out to officers for bravery. Tommy insists they throw dice to see which is the bravest. The winner gets the medal. Military Medal. A piece of junk issued to Tommy who has done something that is not exactly brave but still is not cowardly. When it is presented he takes it and goes back wondering why the army picks on him. MP. Military Police. Soldiers with whom it is unsafe to argue. Mills. Name of a bomb invented by Mills. The only bomb in which Tommy has full confidence, and he mistrusts even that. Mine. An underground tunnel dug by sappers of the Royal Engineer Corps. This tunnel leads from your trench to that of the enemy's. At the end or head of the tunnel a great quantity of explosives are stored, which at a given time are exploded. It is Tommy's job to then go over the top and occupy the crater caused by the explosion. Mine shaft. A shaft leading down to the gallery or tunnel of a mine. Sometimes Tommy, as a reward, is given the job of helping the REs dig this shaft. Minenwerfer. A high-powered trench mortar shell of the Germans, which makes no noise coming through the air. It was invented by Professor Kultur. Tommy does not know that it is near until it bites him. After that nothing worries him. Tommy nicknames them Minis. Mouth organ. An instrument with which a vindictive Tommy causes misery to the rest of his platoon. Some authorities define it as a musical instrument. Mud. A brownish, sticky substance found in the trenches after the frequent rains. A true friend to Tommy, which sticks to him like glue, even though at times Tommy resents this affection and roundly curses said mud. Mufti. The term Tommy gives to civilian clothes. Mufti looks good to him now. Nap. A card game of Tommy's in which the one who stays awake the longest grabs the pot. If all the players fall asleep, the pot goes to the Wounded Soldiers Fund. Napu fini. Tommy's French for gone, through with, finished, disappeared. Napper. Tommy's term for bed. Neutral. Tommy says it means afraid to fight. Next of kin. Nearest relative. A young and ambitious platoon officer bothers his men 2 or 3 times a month taking a record of their next of kin because he thinks that Tommy's grandmother may have changed to his uncle. Night Ops. Slang for night operations or maneuvers. 9.2. A howitzer which fires a shell 9.2 inches in diameter and knocks the tiles off the roof of Tommy's billet through the force of its concussion. No Man's Land. The space between the hostile trenches called No Man's Land because no one owns it and no one wants to. In France you could not give it away. NCC. Non-Combatant Corps. Men who join the army under the stipulation that the only thing they would fight for would be their meals. They have no king and country. NCO. Non-Commissioned Officer. A person hated more than the Germans. Tommy says his stripes are issued out with the rations and he ought to know. Number 9. A pill the doctor gives you if you are suffering with corns or barber's itch or any disease at all. If none are in stock, he gives you a number 6 and number 3, or a number 5 and number 4, anything to make 9. Nose cap. That part of a shell which unscrews and contains the device and scale for setting the time fuse. Some Tommies are ardent souvenir hunters. As soon as a shell bursts in the ground you will see them out with picks and shovels digging in the shell hole for the nose cap. If the shell bursts too near them, they don't dig. Observation balloon. A captive balloon behind the lines which observes the enemy. The enemy doesn't mind being observed, so takes no notice of it. It gives someone a job hauling it down at night, so it has one good point. Observation post. A position in the front line where an artillery officer observes the fire of our guns. He keeps on observing until a German shell observes him. After this there is generally a new officer and a new observation post. OC. Officer commanding. Officers' mess. Where the officers eat the mess that the OS have cooked. OS. Officers' servants. The lowest ranking private in the army who feeds better than the officers he waits on. Oil cans. Tommy's term for a German trench mortar shell which is an old tin filled with explosive and junk that the Boches have no further use for. One up. Tommy's term for a lance corporal who wears one stripe. The private always wonders why he was overlooked when promotions were in order. On the mat. When Tommy is hailed before his commanding officer to explain why he has broken one of the 7,000,000 King's Regulations for the government of the army, his explanation never gets him anywhere unless it is on the wheel of a number. On your own. Another famous or infamous phrase which means Tommy is allowed to do as he pleases. An officer generally puts Tommy "on his own" when he gets Tommy into a dangerous position and sees no way to extricate him. Orderly Corporal. A non-commissioned officer who takes the names of the sick every morning and who keeps his own candle burning after he has ordered lights out at night. Orderly Officer. An officer who, for a week, goes around and asks if there are any complaints, and gives the name of the complaining soldier to the orderly sergeant for extra pack drill. Orderly Room. The captain's office, where everything is disorderly. Orderly Sergeant. A sergeant who, for a week, is supposed to do the work of the orderly officer. Out of bounds. The official army term meaning that Tommy is not allowed to trespass where this sign is displayed. He never wished to until the sign made its appearance. Out there. A term used in Blighty which means in France. Conscientious objectors object to going "out there." Over the top. A famous phrase of the trenches. It is generally the order for the men to charge the German lines. Nearly always it is accompanied by the Jonah wish, "with the best of luck and give them hell." Oxo. Concentrated beef cubes that a fond mother sends out to Tommy because they are advertised as "British to the backbone." Packing. Asbestos wrapping around the barrel of a machine gun to keep the water from leaking out of the barrel casing. Also slang for rations. Pack drill. Punishment for a misdemeanor. Sometimes Tommy gets caught when he fills his pack with straw to lighten it for this drill. Parados. The rear wall of a trench which the Germans continually fill with bits of shell and rifle bullets. Tommy doesn't mind how many they put in the parados. Parapet. The top part of a front trench which Tommy constantly builds up and the Germans just as constantly knock down. Patrol. A few soldiers detailed to go out into no man's land at night and return without any information. Usually these patrols are successful. Pay book. A little book in which is entered the amount of pay Tommy draws. In the back of same there is also a space for his will and last testament. This is to remind Tommy that he is liable to be killed, as if he needed any reminder. Pay Parade. A formation at which Tommy lines up for pay. When his turn comes, the paying officer asks, "How much?" and Tommy answers, "15 francs, sir." He gets 5. Periscope. A thing in the trenches which you look through. After looking through it, you look over the top to really see something. Physical torture. The nickname for physical training. It is torture, especially to a recruit. Pick. A tool shaped like an anchor which is constantly handed to Tommy with the terse command, "Get busy." Pioneer. A soldier detailed in each company to keep the space around the billets clean. He sleeps all day and only gets busy when an officer comes round. He also sleeps at night. Pipsqueak. Tommy's term for a small German shell which makes a pip and then a squeak when it comes over. Poilu. French term for their private soldier. Tommy would use it and sometimes does, but each time he pronounces it differently, so no one knows what he is talking about. Pontoon. A card game, in America known as blackjack or 21. The banker is the only winner. Provost Sergeant. A sergeant detailed to oversee prisoners, their work, etc. Each prisoner solemnly swears that when he gets out of Dink, he is going to shoot this sergeant, and when he does get out he buys him a drink. Pull through. A stout cord with a weight on one end, and a loop on the other for an oily rag. The weighted end is dropped through the bore of the rifle and the rag on the other end is pulled through. Pump. A useless contrivance for emptying the trenches of water. Useless because the trenches refuse to be emptied. Pushing up the daisies. Tommy's term for a soldier who has been killed and buried in France. Queer. Tommy's term for being sick. The doctor immediately informs him that there is nothing queer about him, and Tommy doesn't know whether to feel insulted or complimented. Quid. Tommy's term for a pound, or 20 shillings, about $4.80. He is not on very good terms with this amount as you never see the two together. Q.M. Sergeant. Quartermaster Sergeant, or Quarter as he is called, a non-commissioned officer in a company who wears 3 stripes and a crown, and takes charge of the company's stores, with the emphasis on the "takes." In civil life he was a politician or burglar. Rangefinder. An instrument for ascertaining the distance between 2 objects, using the instrument as one object. It is very accurate, only you get a different result each time you use it, says Tommy. Rapid fire. Means to stick your head over the top at night, aim at the moon, and empty your magazine. If there is no moon, aim at the spot where it should be. Ration bag. A small, very small bag for carrying rations. Sometimes it is really useful for lugging souvenirs. Rations. Various kinds of tasteless food issued by the government to Tommy, to kid him into thinking that he is living in luxury while the Germans are starving. Ration party. Men detailed to carry rations to the front line, pick out a black, cold, and rainy night, put a 50-pound box on your shoulder, sling your rifle, and carry 120 rounds of ammunition. Then go through a communication trench, with the mud up to your knees, down this trench for a half mile, and then find your mates swearing in 7 different languages, duck a few shells and bullets, and then ask Tommy for his definition of a ration party. You will be surprised to learn that it is the same as yours. Rats. The main inhabitants of the trenches and dugouts. Very useful for chewing up leather equipment and running over your face when asleep. A British rat resembles a bulldog, while a German one, through a course of Kultur, resembles a dachshund. Red Cap. Tommy's nickname for a staff officer because he wears a red band around his cap. Red Tape. A useless sort of procedure. The main object of this is to prolong the war and give a lot of fat jobs to army politicians. Regimental number. Each soldier has a number whether or not he was a convict in civil life. Tommy never forgets his number when he sees it on orders for leave. R.P. Regimental Police. Men detailed in a battalion to annoy Tommy and to prevent him from doing what he most desires. Reinforcements. A lot of new men sent out from England who think that the war will be over in a week after they enter the trenches. Relaying. A term used by the artillery. After a gun is fired, it is relayed or aimed at something out of sight. Respirator. A cloth helmet, chemically treated, with glass eye holes, which Tommy puts over his head as a protection against poison gas. This helmet never leaves Tommy's person, he even sleeps with it. Rest. A period of time for rest allotted to Tommy upon being relieved from the trenches. He uses this rest to mend roads, dig trenches, and make himself generally useful while behind the lines. Rest billets. Shell-shattered houses, generally barns, in which Tommy rests when relieved from the firing line. Ricco. Term for a ricochet bullet. It makes a whining noise and Tommy always ducks when a Ricco passes him. Rifle. A part of Tommy's armament. Its main use is to be cleaned. Sometimes it is fired when you are not using a pick or shovel. You also present arms by numbers with it. This is a very fascinating exercise to Tommy. Ask him. Rifle grenade. A bomb on the end of a rod. This rod is inserted into the barrel of a specially designed rifle. R.I.P. In Monk's highbrow, Requiescat in pace. Put on little wooden crosses over soldiers' graves. It means rest in peace, but Tommy says like as not it means rest in pieces, especially if the man under the cross has been sent west by a bomb or shell explosion. Road dangerous, use trench. A familiar sign on roads immediately in rear of the firing line. It is to warn soldiers that it is within sight of Fritz. Tommy never believes these signs and swanks up the road. Later on he tells the Red Cross nurse that the sign told the truth. Roll of Honor. The name given to the published casualty lists of the war. Tommy has no ambition for his name to appear on the Roll of Honor unless it comes under the heading "Slightly Wounded." R.C. Roman Catholic. One of the advantages of being an R.C. is that church parade is not compulsory. Rooty. Tommy's nickname for bread. Route March. A useless expenditure of leather and energy. These marches teach Tommy to be kind to overloaded beasts of burden. R.A.M.C. The Royal Army Medical Corps. Tommy says it means rob all my comrades. R.E.'s. Royal Engineers. R.F.A.'s. Royal Field Artillerymen. R.F.C.'s. Royal Flying Corps. Rum. A nectar of the gods, issued in the early morning to Tommy. Rum Issue. A daily formation at which Tommy receives a spoonful of rum, that is, if any is left over from the sergeant's mess. Runner. A soldier who is detailed or picked as an orderly for an officer while in the trenches. His real job is to take messages under fire, asking how many tins of jam are required for 1917. S.A.A. Small Arms Ammunition. Small steel pellets which have a bad habit of drilling holes in the anatomy of Tommy and Fritz. Salvo. Battery firing 4 guns simultaneously. Sandbag. A jute bag which is constantly being filled with earth. Its main uses are to provide Tommy with material for a comfortable kip and to strengthen parapets. Sap. A small ditch or trench dug from the front line and leading out into no man's land in the direction of the German trenches. Sapper. A man who saps or digs mines. He thinks he is 33 degrees above an ordinary soldier, while in fact he is generally beneath him. Sausage balloon. See observation balloon. S.B. Stretcher bearer. The motive power of a stretcher. He is generally looking the other way when a 14-stone Tommy gets hit. Scaling ladder. Small wooden ladders used by Tommy for climbing out of the front trench when he goes over the top. When Tommy sees these ladders being brought into the trench, he sits down and writes his will in his little pay book. Sentry go. Time on guard. It means sentry come. Sergeant's mess. Where the sergeants eat. Nearly all of the rum has a habit of disappearing into the sergeant's mess. 75's. A very efficient field gun of the French, which can fire 30 shells per minute. The gun needs no relaying due to the recoil which throws the gun back to its original position. The gun that knocked out Jack Johnson, therefore called Jess Willard. Sewed in a blanket. Term for a soldier who has been buried. His remains are generally sewn in a blanket and the piece of blanket is generally deducted from his pay that is due. Shag. Cigarette tobacco which an American can never learn to use. Even the mules object to the smell of it. Shell. A device of the artillery which sometimes makes Tommy wish he had been born in a neutral country. Shell hole. A hole in the ground caused by the explosion of a shell. Tommy's favorite resting place while under fire. Shovel. A tool closely related to the pick family. In France the shovel is mightier than the sword. Shrapnel. A shell which bursts in the air and scatters small pieces of metal over a large area. It is used to test the resisting power of steel helmets. Sicker. Nickname for the sick report book. It is Tommy's ambition to get on this sicker without feeling sick. Side parade. A formation at which the doctor informs sick or would-be sick Tommies that they are not sick. 60-pounder. One of our shells which weighs 60 pounds, officially. When Tommy handles them, their unofficial weight is 300 weight. Slacker. An insect in England who is afraid to join the army. There are 3 things in this world that Tommy hates: a slacker, a German, and a trench rat. It's hard to tell which he hates worst. Slag heap. A pile of rubbish, tin cans, etc. Smoke bomb. A shell which, in exploding, emits a dense white smoke, hiding the operations of troops. When Tommy, in attacking a trench, gets into this smoke, he imagines himself a magnet and thinks all the machine guns and rifles are firing at him alone. Smoke helmet. See respirator. Sniper. A good shot whose main occupation is picking off unwary individuals of the enemy. In the long run a sniper usually gets sniped. Snipe hole. A hole in a steel plate through which snipers snipe. It is not fair for the enemy to shoot at these holes, but they do, and often hit them, or at least the man behind them. Soldier's friend. Metal polish costing 3 ha'pence which Tommy uses to polish his buttons. Tommy wonders why it is called soldier's friend. Somewhere in France. A certain spot in France where Tommy has to live in mud, hunt for cooties, and duck shells and bullets. Tommy's official address. Souvenir. A begging word used by the French kiddies. When it is addressed to Tommy it generally means a penny, biscuits, bully beef, or a tin of jam. Spy. A suspicious person whom no one suspects until he is caught. Then all say they knew he was a spy, but had no chance to report it to the proper authorities. Spud. Tommy's name for the solitary potato which gets into the stew. It is a great mystery how that lonely little Spud got into such bad company. Stand to. Order to mount the fire step, given just as it begins to grow dark. Stand down. Order given in the trenches at break of dawn to let the men know their night watch is ended. It has a pleasant sound in Tommy's ear. Star shell. See flare. Steel helmet. A round hat made out of steel which is supposed to be shrapnel proof. It is until a piece of shell goes through it, then Tommy loses interest as to whether it is shrapnel proof or not. He calls it a tin hat. Stew. A concoction of the cook's which contains bully beef, Maconochie rations, water, a few lumps of fresh meat, and a potato. Occasionally a little salt falls into it by mistake. Tommy is supposed to eat this mess. He does, worse luck. Strafing. Tommy's chief sport. Shelling the Germans. Taken from Fritz's own dictionary. Stretcher. A contrivance on which dead and wounded are carried. The only time Tommy gets a free ride in the trenches is while on a stretcher. As a rule, he does not appreciate this means of transportation. Suicide Club. Nickname for bombers and machine gunners. No misnomer. Supper. Tommy's fourth meal, generally eaten just before lights out. It is composed of the remains of the day's rations. There are a lot of Tommies who never eat supper. There is a reason. SW. Shell wound. What the doctor marks on your hospital chart when a shell has removed your leg. Swamping. Putting on airs, showing off, generally accredited to Yankees. Swinging the lead. Means throwing the bull. Sweating on leave. Impatiently waiting for your name to appear in orders for leave. If Tommy sweats very long he generally catches cold and when leave comes he is too sick to go. Taking over. Going into a trench. Tommy takes over, is taken out, and sometimes is put under. Taube. A type of German aeroplane whose special ambition is beating the altitude record. It occasionally loses its way and flies over the British lines and then stops flying. Tea. A dark brown drug which Tommy has to have at certain periods of the day. Battles have been known to have been stopped to enable Tommy to get his tea, or char as it is commonly known. Tear shell. Trench name for the German lachrymose chemical shell which makes the eyes smart. The only time Tommy is outwardly sentimental. Telephone. A little instrument with a wire attached to it. An artillery observer whispers something into this instrument, and immediately one of your batteries behind the line opens up and drops a few shells into your front trench. This keeps up until the observer whispers, "Your range is too short." Then the shells drop nearer the German lines. Terrier. Tommy's nickname for a territorial or Saturday night soldier. A regular despises a territorial, while a territorial looks down on Kitchener's mob. Kitchener's mob has the utmost contempt for both of them. Territorial. A peacetime soldier with the same status as the American militiaman. Before the war they were called Saturday night soldiers, but they soon proved themselves every night soldiers. The Old Man. Captain of a company, he is called the Old Man because generally his age is about 28. The best o' luck. The Jonah phrase of the trenches. Every time Tommy goes over the top or on a trench raid his mates wish him the best o' luck. It means that if you are lucky enough to come back you generally have an arm or leg missing. Thumbs up. Tommy's expression which means "everything is fine with me." Very seldom used during an intense bombardment. Time X. Expiration of term of enlistment. The only time Tommy is a civilian in the trenches, but about 10 minutes after, he is a soldier for duration of war. Tin Hat. Tommy's name for his steel helmet which is made out of a metal about as hard as mush. The only advantage is that it is heavy and greatly adds to the weight of Tommy's equipment. Its most popular use is for carrying eggs. TNT. A high explosive which the Army Ordnance Corps prescribes for Fritz. Fritz prefers a No. 9 pill. Tommy Atkins. The name England gives to an English soldier, even if his name is Willie Jones. Tommy's Cooker. A spirit stove widely advertised as a suitable gift to the men in the trenches. Many are sent out to Tommy, and most of them are thrown away. Tonite. The explosive contained in a rifle grenade. It looks like a harmless reel of cotton before it explodes. After it explodes, the spectator is missing. Toots Sweet. Tommy's French for hurry up, look smart. Generally used in a French estaminet when Tommy only has a couple of minutes in which to drink his beer. Top Hats at Home. Tommy's name for Parliament when his application for leave has been turned down, or when no strawberry jam arrives with the rations. Town Major. An officer stationed in a French town or village who is supposed to look after billets, upkeep of roads, and act as interpreter. Transport. An aggregation of mules, limbers, and Rough Riders, whose duty is to keep the men in the trenches supplied with rations and supplies. Sometimes a shell drops within 2 miles of them and Tommy doesn't get his rations, etc. Traverse. Sandbags piled in a trench so that the trench cannot be traversed by Tommy. Sometimes it prevents enfilading fire by the enemy. Trench. A ditch full of water, rats, and soldiers. During his visit to France, Tommy uses these ditches as residences. Now and again he sticks his head over the top to take a look at the surrounding scenery. If he is lucky, he lives to tell his mates what he saw. Trench feet. A disease of the feet contracted in the trenches from exposure to extreme cold and wet. Tommy's greatest ambition is to contract this disease because it means Blighty for him. Trench fever. A malady contracted in the trenches. The symptoms are high temperature, bodily pains, and homesickness. Mostly homesickness. A bad case lands Tommy in Blighty. A slight case lands him back in the trenches where he tries to get it worse than ever. Trenchitis. A combination of fed-upness and homesickness, experienced by Tommy in the trenches, especially when he receives a letter from a friend in Blighty who is making a fortune working in a munition plant. Trench mortar. A gun like a stovepipe which throws shells at the German trenches. Tommy detests these mortars because when they take positions near to him in the trenches, he knows that it is only a matter of minutes before a German shell with his name and number on it will be knocking at his door. Trench pudding. A delectable mess of broken biscuits, condensed milk, jam, and mud, slightly flavored with smoke. Tommy prepares, cooks, and eats this. Next day he has trench fever. Trench raid. Several men detailed to go over the top at night and shake hands with the Germans, and if possible persuade some of them to be prisoners. At times the raiders would themselves get raided because Fritz refused to shake and adopted nasty methods. Turpenite. A deadly chemical shell invented by an enthusiastic war correspondent suffering from brainstorm. Companies and batteries were supposed to die standing up from its effects, but they refused to do this. 12 in 1. Means that 12 men are to share one loaf of bread. When the slicing takes place, the war in the dugout makes the European argument look like 30 cents. Up against the wall. Tommy's term for a man who is to be shot by a firing squad. Up the line. Term generally used in rest billets when Tommy talks about the fire trench or fighting line. When orders are issued to go up the line, Tommy immediately goes up in the air. VC. Victoria Cross, or Very Careless, as Tommy calls it. It is a bronze medal worn by Tommy for being very careless with his life. Very Lights. A star shell invented by Mr. Very. See Flare. Vickers gun. A machine gun improved on by a fellow named Vickers. His intentions were good, but his improvements, according to Tommy, were rotten. Via Blanc. French white wine made from vinegar. They forgot the red ink. Vin Rouge. French red wine made from vinegar and red ink. Tommy pays good money for it. Waders. Rubber hip boots, used when the water in the trenches is up to Tommy's neck. Waiting man. The cleanest man at guard mounting. He does not have to walk post, is supposed to wait on the guard. Washout. Tommy's idea of something that is worth nothing. Water bottle. A metal bottle for carrying water, when not used for rum, beer, or wine. Waterproof. A rubber sheet issued to Tommy to keep him dry. It does when the sun is out. Wave. A line of troops which goes over the top in a charge. The waves are numbered according to their turn in going over, for instance, first wave, second wave, etc. Tommy would sooner go over with the 10th wave. Wet canteen. A military saloon or pub where Tommy can get a wet. Most campaigns and battles are planned and fought in these places. Whiz bang. A small German shell which whizzes through the air and explodes with a bang. Their bark is worse than their bite. Wind up. Term generally applied to the Germans when they send up several star shells at once because they are nervous and expect an attack or night raid on their trenches. Windy. Tommy's name for a nervous soldier or coward. Wipers. Tommy's name for Ypres. Generally he calls it Yeeps. A place up the line which Tommy likes to duck. It is even hot in the winter time at Wipers. Wire. See barbed wire, but don't go over the top to look at it. It isn't safe. Wire cutters. An instrument for cutting barbed wire, but mostly used for driving nails. Wiring party. Another social affair for which Tommy receives invitations. It consists of going over the top at night and stretching barbed wire between stakes. A German machine gun generally takes the place of an orchestra. Woodbine. A cigarette made of paper and old hay. Tommy swears by a woodbine. Wooden cross. Two pieces of wood in the form of a cross placed at the head of a Tommy's grave. Inscribed on it are his rank, name, number, and regiment. Also date of death and last but not least the letters RIP. Working party. A sort of compulsory invitation affair for which Tommy often is honored with an invitation. It consists of digging, filling sandbags, and ducking shells and bullets. Zeppelin. A bag full of gas invented by a Count full of gas. It is a dirigible airship used by the Germans for killing babies and dropping bombs in open fields. You never see them over the trenches. It is safer to bombard civilians in cities. They use iron crosses for ballast. This is the end of Tommy's Dictionary of the Trenches. The next file will begin the story proper. Chapters 1 and 2 of Over the Top. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain, and this recording is by Mark Smith of Simpsonville, South Carolina. Over the Top by Arthur Empey. Chapter 1. From Mufti to Khaki. It was in an office in Jersey City. I was sitting at my desk talking to a lieutenant of the Jersey National Guard. On the wall was a big war map, decorated with variously colored little flags showing the position of the opposing armies on the Western Front in France. In front of me on the desk lay a New York paper with big flaring headlines: "Lusitania sunk. American lives lost." The windows were open and a feeling of spring pervaded the air. Through the open windows came the strains of a hurdy-gurdy playing in the street. "I didn't raise my boy to be a soldier." "Lusitania sunk. American lives lost. I didn't raise my boy to be a soldier." To us these did not seem to jibe. The lieutenant in silence opened one of the lower drawers of his desk and took from it an American flag which he solemnly draped over the war map on the wall. Then, turning to me with a grim face, said: "How about it, Sergeant? You had better get out of the muster roll of the Mounted Scouts, as I think they will be needed in the course of a few days." We busied ourselves till late in the evening writing out emergency telegrams for the men to report when the call should come from Washington. Then we went home. I crossed over to New York, and as I went up Fulton Street to take the subway to Brooklyn, the lights in the tall buildings of New York seemed to be burning brighter than usual, as if they too had read "Lusitania sunk. American lives lost." They seemed to be glowing with anger and righteous indignation, and their rays wigwagged the message, "Repay." Months passed, the telegrams lying handy but covered with dust. Then, one momentous morning the lieutenant with a sigh of disgust removed the flag from the war map and returned to his desk. I immediately followed this action by throwing the telegrams into the wastebasket. Then we looked at each other in silence. He was squirming in his chair and I felt depressed and uneasy. The telephone rang and I answered it. It was a business call for me requesting my services for an out of town assignment. Business was not very good, so this was very welcome. After listening to the proposition, I seemed to be swayed by a peculiarly strong force within me, and answered: "I am sorry that I cannot accept your offer, but I am leaving for England next week," and hung up the receiver. The lieutenant swung around in his chair and stared at me in blank astonishment. A sinking sensation came over me, but I defiantly answered his look with: "Well, it's so, I'm going." And I went. The trip across was uneventful. I landed at Tilbury, England, then got into a string of matchbox cars and proceeded to London, arriving there about 10 p.m. I took a room in a hotel near St. Pancras Station for 5 and 6 fire extra. The room was minus the fire, but the extra seemed to keep me warm. That night there was a Zeppelin raid, but I didn't see much of it, because the slit in the curtains was too small and I had no desire to make it larger. Next morning the telephone bell rang, and someone asked, "Are you there?" I was, hardly. Anyway, I learned that the Zeps had returned to their fatherland, so I went out into the street expecting to see scenes of awful devastation and a cowering populace, but everything was normal. People were calmly proceeding to their work. Crossing the street, I accosted a bobby with, "Can you direct me to the place of damage?" He asked me, "What damage?" In surprise I answered, "Why, the damage caused by the Zeps." With a wink he replied, "There was no damage, we missed them again." After several fruitless inquiries of the passers-by, I decided to go on my own in search of ruined buildings and scenes of destruction. I boarded a bus which carried me through Tottenham Court Road. Recruiting posters were everywhere. The one that impressed me most was a life-size picture of Lord Kitchener with his finger pointing directly at me, under the caption of "Your King and Country need you." No matter which way I turned, the accusing finger followed me. I was an American, in mufti, and had a little American flag in the lapel of my coat. I had no king, and my country had seen fit not to need me, but still that pointing finger made me feel small and ill at ease. I got off the bus to try to dissipate this feeling by mixing with the throng of the sidewalks. Presently I came to a recruiting office. Inside, sitting at a desk, was a lonely Tommy Atkins. I decided to interview him in regard to joining the British Army. I opened the door. He looked up and greeted me with, "I say, mate, want to take on?" I looked at him and answered, "Well, whatever that is, I'll take a chance at it." Without the aid of an interpreter, I found out that Tommy wanted to know if I cared to join the British Army. He asked me, "Did you ever hear of the Royal Fusiliers?" Well, in London, you know, Yanks are supposed to know everything, so I was not going to appear ignorant and answered, "Sure." After listening for one half hour to Tommy's tale of their exploits on the firing line, I decided to join. Tommy took me to the recruiting headquarters where I met a typical English captain. He asked my nationality. I immediately pulled out my American passport and showed it to him. It was signed by Lansing. Brian had lost his job a little while previously. After looking at the passport, he informed me that he was sorry but could not enlist me, as it would be a breach of neutrality. I insisted that I was not neutral, because to me it seemed that a real American could not be neutral when big things were in progress, but the captain would not enlist me. With disgust in my heart, I went out in the street. I had gone about a block when a recruiting sergeant who had followed me out of the office tapped me on the shoulder with his swagger stick and said, "Say, I can get you in the army. We have a lieutenant down at the other office who can do anything. He has just come out of the O.T.C. (Officers Training Corps) and does not know what neutrality is." I decided to take a chance, and accepted his invitation for an introduction to the lieutenant. I entered the office and went up to him, opened up my passport and said, "Before going further I wish to state that I am an American, not too proud to fight, and want to join your army." He looked at me in a nonchalant manner and answered, "That's all right. We take anything over here." I looked at him kind of hard and replied, "So I notice," but it went over his head. He got out an enlistment blank and placing his finger on a blank line said, "Sign here." I answered, "Not on your tintype." "I beg your pardon?" Then I explained to him that I would not sign it without first reading it. I read it over and signed for duration of war. Some of the recruits were lucky. They signed for 7 years only. Then he asked me my birthplace. I answered, "Ogden, Utah." He said, "Oh, yes, just outside of New York?" With a smile I replied, "Well, it's up the state a little." Then I was taken before the doctor and passed as physically fit, and was issued a uniform. When I reported back to the lieutenant, he suggested that, being an American, I go on recruiting service and try to shame some of the slackers into joining the army. "All you have to do," he said, "is to go out on the street, and when you see a young fellow in mufti who looks physically fit, just stop him and give him this kind of a talk. Aren't you ashamed of yourself, a Britisher, physically fit, and in mufti when your king and country need you? Don't you know that your country is at war, and that the place for every young Briton is on the firing line? Here I am, an American, in khaki, who came 4,000 miles to fight for your king and country, and you as yet have not enlisted. Why don't you join? Now is the time." "This argument ought to get many recruits, Empey, so go out and see what you can do." He then gave me a small rosette of red, white, and blue ribbon, with 3 little streamers hanging down. This was the recruiting insignia and was to be worn on the left side of the cap. Armed with a swagger stick and my patriotic rosette, I went out into Tottenham Court Road in quest of cannon fodder. 2 or 3 poorly dressed civilians passed me, and although they appeared physically fit, I said to myself, "They don't want to join the army, perhaps they have someone dependent on them for support," so I did not accost them. Coming down the street I saw a young dandy, top hat and all, with a fashionably dressed girl walking beside him. I muttered, "You are my meat," and when he came abreast of me I stepped directly in his path and stopped him with my swagger stick, saying, "You would look fine in khaki. Why not change that top hat for a steel helmet? Aren't you ashamed of yourself, a husky young chap like you in mufti when men are needed in the trenches? Here I am, an American, come 4,000 miles from Ogden, Utah, just outside of New York, to fight for your king and country. Don't be a slacker. Buck up and get into uniform. Come over to the recruiting office and I'll have you enlisted." He yawned and answered, "I don't care if you came 40,000 miles, no one asked you to." And he walked on. The girl gave me a sneering look. I was speechless. I recruited for 3 weeks and nearly got one recruit. This perhaps was not the greatest stunt in the world, but it got me back at the officer who told me, "Yes, we take anything over here." I had been spending a good lot of my recruiting time in the saloon bar of the Wheatsheaf pub. There was a very attractive blonde barmaid who helped kill time. I was not as serious in those days as I was a little later when I reached the front. Well, it was the 6th day and my recruiting report was blank. I was getting low in the pocket. Barmaids haven't much use for anyone who cannot buy drinks. So I looked around for recruiting material. You know a man on recruiting service gets a bob or shilling for every recruit he entices into joining the army. The recruit is supposed to get this, but he would not be a recruit if he were wise to this fact, would he? Down at the end of the bar was a young fellow in mufti who was very patriotic. He had about 4 old 6 ales aboard. He asked me if he could join, showed me his left hand, 2 fingers were missing, but I said that did not matter as we take anything over here. The left hand is the rifle hand as the piece is carried at the slope on the left shoulder. Nearly everything in England is by the left, even general traffic keeps to the port side. I took the applicant over to headquarters where he was hurriedly examined. Recruiting surgeons were busy in those days and did not have much time for thorough physical examinations. My recruit was passed as "fit" by the doctor and turned over to a corporal to make note of his scars. I was mystified. Suddenly the corporal burst out with, "Blimey, 2 of his fingers are gone." Turning to me, he said, "You certainly have your nerve with you, not 'alf you ain't, to bring this beggar in." The doctor came over and exploded, "What do you mean by bringing in a man in this condition?" Looking out of the corner of my eye, I noticed that the officer who had recruited me had joined the group, and I could not help answering, "Well, sir, I was told that you took anything over here." I think they called it Yankee impudence. Anyhow, it ended my recruiting. Chapter II. Blighty to Rest Billets. The next morning the captain sent for me and informed me, "Empey, as a recruiting sergeant, you are a washout," and sent me to a training depot. After arriving at this place I was hustled to the quartermaster's stores and received an awful shock. The quartermaster sergeant spread a waterproof sheet on the ground and commenced throwing a miscellaneous assortment of straps, buckles, and other paraphernalia into it. I thought he would never stop, but when the pile reached to my knees he paused long enough to say, "Next, number 5217, Arras, B Company." I gazed in bewilderment at the pile of junk in front of me, and then my eyes wandered around looking for the wagon which was to carry it to the barracks. I was rudely brought to earth by the quarter exclaiming, "'Ere you, 'op it, take it away. Blind my eyes, he's looking for his batman to help him carry it." Struggling under the load, with frequent pauses for rest, I reached our barracks, large car barns, and my platoon leader came to the rescue. It was a marvel to me how quickly he assembled the equipment. After he had completed the task, he showed me how to adjust it on my person. Pretty soon I stood before him a proper Tommy Atkins in heavy marching order, feeling like an overloaded camel. On my feet were heavy-soled boots, studded with hobnails, the toes and heels of which were reinforced by steel half-moons. My legs were encased in woolen puttees, olive drab in color, with my trousers overlapping them at the top. Then a woolen khaki tunic, under which was a bluish-gray woolen shirt, minus a collar. Beneath this shirt a woolen belly band about 6 inches wide, held in place by tie strings of white tape. On my head was a heavy woolen trench cap, with huge ear flaps buttoned over the top. Then the equipment. A canvas belt with ammunition pockets and two wide canvas straps like suspenders, called D straps, fastened to the belt in front, passing over each shoulder, crossing in the middle of my back, and attached by buckles to the rear of the belt. On the right side of the belt hung a water bottle, covered with felt. On the left side was my bayonet and scabbard, and entrenching tool handle, this handle strapped to the bayonet scabbard. In the rear was my entrenching tool, carried in a canvas case. This tool was a combination pick and spade. A canvas haversack was strapped to the left side of the belt, while on my back was the pack, also of canvas, held in place by two canvas straps over the shoulders. Suspended on the bottom of the pack was my mess tin or canteen in a neat little canvas case. My waterproof sheet, looking like a jelly roll, was strapped on top of the pack, with a wooden stick for cleaning the breech of the rifle projecting from each end. On a lanyard around my waist hung a huge jackknife with a can opener attachment. The pack contained my overcoat, an extra pair of socks, change of underwear, hold all, containing knife, fork, spoon, comb, toothbrush, lather brush, shaving soap, and a razor made of tin, with "Made in England" stamped on the blade. When trying to shave with this, it made you wish that you were at war with Patagonia, so that you could have a hollow ground stamped "Made in Germany." Then your housewife, button cleaning outfit, consisting of a brass button stick, two stiff brushes, and a box of "Soldier's Friend" paste. Then a shoe brush and a box of dubbin, a writing pad, indelible pencil, envelopes and pay book, and personal belongings, such as a small mirror, a decent razor, and a sheaf of unanswered letters, and fags. In your haversack you carried your iron rations, meaning a tin of bully beef, 4 biscuits, and a can containing tea, sugar, and Oxo cubes, a couple of pipes and a package of shag, a tin of rifle oil, and a pull-through. Tommy generally carries the oil with his rations, it gives the cheese a sort of sardine taste. Add to this a first aid pouch and a long, ungainly rifle patterned after the Daniel Boone period, and you have an idea of a British soldier in Blighty. Before leaving for France this rifle is taken from him and he is issued with a Lee Enfield short trench rifle and a ration bag. In France he receives 2 gas helmets, a sheepskin coat, rubber mackintosh, steel helmet, 2 blankets, tear shell goggles, a balaclava helmet, gloves, and a tin of anti-frostbite grease which is excellent for greasing the boots. Add to this the weight of his rations, and can you blame Tommy for growling at a 20-kilo route march? Having served as Sergeant Major in the United States Cavalry, I tried to tell the English drill sergeants their business, but it did not work. They immediately put me as Batman in their mess. Many a greasy dish of stew was accidentally spilled over them. I would sooner fight than be a waiter, so when the order came through from headquarters calling for a draft of 250 reinforcements for France, I volunteered. Then we went before the M.O. (medical officer) for another physical examination. This was very brief. He asked our names and numbers and said, "Fit," and we went out to fight. We were put into troop trains and sent to Southampton, where we detrained, and had our trench rifles issued to us. Then in columns of 2s, we went up the gangplank of a little steamer lying alongside the dock. At the head of the gangplank there was an old sergeant who directed that we line ourselves along both rails of the ship. Then he ordered us to take life belts from the racks overhead and put them on. I have crossed the ocean several times and knew I was not seasick, but when I belted on that life belt, I had a sensation of sickness. After we got out into the stream all I could think of was that there were a million German submarines with a torpedo on each, across the warhead of which was inscribed my name and address. After 5 hours we came alongside a pier and disembarked. I had attained another one of my ambitions. I was "somewhere in France." We slept in the open that night on the side of a road. About 6 the next morning we were ordered to entrain. I looked around for the passenger coaches, but all I could see on the siding were cattle cars. We climbed into these. On the side of each car was a sign reading Homme 40, Chevaux 8. When we got inside of the cars, we thought that perhaps the sign painter had reversed the order of things. After 48 hours in these trucks we detrained at Rouen. At this place we went through an intensive training for 10 days. This training consisted of the rudiments of trench warfare. Trenches had been dug, with barbed wire entanglements, bombing saps, dugouts, observation posts, and machine gun emplacements. We were given a smattering of trench cooking, sanitation, bomb throwing, reconnoitering, listening post, constructing and repairing barbed wire, carrying in parties, methods used in attack and defense, wiring parties, mass formation, and the procedure for poison gas attacks. On the 10th day we again met our friends Homme 40, Chevaux 8. 36 hours more of misery, and we arrived at the town of can't say. After unloading our rations and equipment, we lined up on the road in columns of fours, waiting for the order to march. A dull rumbling could be heard. The sun was shining. I turned to the man on my left and asked, "What's the noise, Bill?" He did not know, but his face was of a pea green color. Jim on my right also did not know, but suggested that I ask the Sergeant. Coming towards us was an old grizzled sergeant, properly fed up with the war, so I "orsked" him. "Think it's going to rain, Sergeant?" He looked at me in contempt and grunted, "'Ow's it a goin' to rain with the bloomin' sun a shinin'?" I looked guilty. "Them's the guns up the line, my lad, and you'll get enough of 'em before you gets back to Blighty." My knees seemed to wilt, and I squeaked out a weak "Oh." Then we started our march up to the line in 10-kilo treks. After the first day's march we arrived at our rest billets. In France they call them rest billets because while in them Tommy works 7 days a week, and on the 8th day of the week he is given 24 hours on his own. Our billet was a spacious affair, a large barn on the left side of the road, which had 100 entrances, 99 for shells, rats, wind, and rain, and the 100th one for Tommy. I was tired out, and using my shrapnel-proof helmet (shrapnel-proof until a piece of shrapnel hits it) or tin hat for a pillow, lay down in the straw and was soon fast asleep. I must have slept about 2 hours, when I awoke with a prickling sensation all over me. As I thought, the straw had worked through my uniform. I woke up the fellow lying on my left who had been up the line before, and asked him, "Does the straw bother you, mate? It's worked through my uniform and I can't sleep." In a sleepy voice he answered, "That ain't straw, them's cooties." From that time on my friends the "cooties" were constantly with me. Cooties, or body lice, are the bane of Tommy's existence. The aristocracy of the trenches very seldom call them "cooties," they speak of them as "fleas." To an American, flea means a small insect armed with a bayonet who is wont to jab it into you and then hop, skip, and jump to the next place to be attacked. There is an advantage in having fleas on you instead of "cooties," in that in one of his extended jumps said flea is liable to land on the fellow next to you. He has the typical energy and push of the American, while the "cootie" has the bulldog tenacity of the Englishman. He holds on and consolidates or digs in until his meal is finished. There is no way to get rid of them permanently. No matter how often you bathe, and that is not very often, or how many times you change your underwear, your friends, the "cooties," are always in evidence. The billets are infested with them, especially so if there is straw on the floor. I have taken a bath and put on brand new underwear, in fact a complete change of uniform, and then turned in for the night. The next morning my shirt would be full of them. It is a common sight to see 8 or 10 soldiers sitting under a tree with their shirts over their knees, engaging in a "shirt hunt." At night, about half an hour before lights out, you can see the Tommies grouped around a candle, trying, in its dim light, to rid their underwear of the vermin. A popular and very quick method is to take your shirt and drawers and run the seams back and forward in the flame from the candle and burn them out. This practice is dangerous because you are liable to burn holes in the garments if you are not careful. Recruits generally sent to Blighty for a brand of insect powder advertised as "good for body lice." The advertisement is quite right. The powder is good for "cooties," they simply thrive on it. The older men of our battalion were wiser and made scratchers out of wood. These were rubbed smooth with a bit of stone or sand to prevent splinters. They were about 18 inches long, and Tommy guarantees that a scratcher of this length will reach any part of the body which may be attacked. Some of the fellows were lazy and only made their scratchers 12 inches, but many a night when on guard, looking over the top from the fire step of the front line trench, they would have given 1,000 quid for the other 6 inches. Once while we were in rest billets, an Irish Hussar regiment camped in an open field opposite our billet. After they had picketed and fed their horses, a general shirt hunt took place. The troopers ignored the call "dinner up" and kept on with their search for big game. They had a curious method of procedure. They hung their shirts over a hedge and beat them with their entrenching tool handles. I asked one of them why they didn't pick them off by hand, and he answered, "We haven't had a bath for 9 weeks or a change of clabber. If I tried to pick the cooties off my shirt, I would be here for duration of war." After taking a close look at his shirt, I agreed with him, it was alive. The greatest shock a recruit gets when he arrives at his battalion in France is to see the men engaging in a "cootie" hunt. With an air of contempt and disgust he avoids the company of the older men, until a couple of days later, in a torment of itching, he also has to resort to a shirt hunt, or spend many a sleepless night of misery. During these hunts there are lots of pertinent remarks bandied back and forth among the explorers, such as, "Say, Bill, I'll swap you 2 little ones for a big one," or "I've got a black one here that looks like Kaiser Bill." One sunny day in the front line trench, I saw 3 officers sitting outside of their dugout. "Cooties" are no respecters of rank. I have even noticed a suspicious uneasiness about a certain well known general. One of them was a major, 2 of them were exploring their shirts, paying no attention to the occasional shells which passed overhead. The major was writing a letter; every now and then he would lay aside his writing pad, search his shirt for a few minutes, get an inspiration, and then resume writing. At last he finished his letter and gave it to his runner. I was curious to see whether he was writing to an insect firm, so when the runner passed me I engaged him in conversation and got a glimpse at the address on the envelope. It was addressed to Miss Alice Somebody, in London. The runner informed me that Miss Somebody was the major's sweetheart, and that he wrote to her every day. Just imagine it, writing a love letter during a "cootie" hunt, but such is the creed of the trenches. End of chapter 2. Chapters 3 and 4 of Over the Top. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. This recording is by Mark Smith of Simpsonville, South Carolina. Over the Top by Arthur Empey. Chapter 3. I Go to Church. Upon enlistment we had identity discs issued to us. These were small discs of red fiber worn around the neck by means of a string. Most of the Tommies also used a little metal disc which they wore around the left wrist by means of a chain. They had previously figured it out that if their heads were blown off, the disc on the left wrist would identify them. If they lost their left arm, the disc around the neck would serve the purpose, but if their head and left arm were blown off, no one would care who they were, so it did not matter. On one side of the disc was inscribed your rank, name, number, and battalion, while on the other was stamped your religion. C of E, meaning Church of England, RC, Roman Catholic, W. Wesleyan, P. Presbyterian, but if you happened to be an atheist they left it blank and just handed you a pick and shovel. On my disc was stamped C of E. This is how I got it. The lieutenant who enlisted me asked my religion. I was not sure of the religion of the British Army, so I answered, "Oh, any old thing," and he promptly put down C of E. Now just imagine my hard luck. Out of 5 religions I was unlucky enough to pick the only one where church parade was compulsory. The next morning was Sunday. I was sitting in the billet writing home to my sister, telling her of my wonderful exploits while under fire. All recruits do this. The sergeant major put his head in the door of the billet and shouted, "C of E outside for church parade." I kept on writing. Turning to me, in a loud voice, he asked, "Empey, aren't you C of E?" I answered, "Yep." In an angry tone, he commanded, "Don't you yep me. Say yes, Sergeant Major." I did so. Somewhat mollified, he ordered, "Outside for church parade." I looked up and answered, "I'm not going to church this morning." He said, "Oh, yes, you are." I answered, "Oh, no, I'm not." But I went. We lined up outside with rifles and bayonets, 120 rounds of ammunition, wearing our tin hats, and the march to church began. After marching about 5 kilometers, we turned off the road into an open field. At one end of this field the chaplain was standing in a limber. We formed a semicircle around him. Overhead there was a black speck circling round and round in the sky. This was a German Fokker. The chaplain had a book in his left hand, left eye on the book, right eye on the airplane. We Tommies were lucky we had no books, so had both eyes on the airplane. After church parade we were marched back to our billets and played football all afternoon. Chapter 4 Into the Trench. The next morning the draft was inspected by our general, and we were assigned to different companies. The boys in the brigade had nicknamed this general Old Pepper, and he certainly earned the sobriquet. I was assigned to B Company with another American named Stewart. For the next 10 days we rested, repairing roads for the Frenchies, drilling, and digging bombing trenches. One morning we were informed that we were going up the line and our march began. It took us 3 days to reach reserve billets, each day's march bringing the sound of the guns nearer and nearer. At night, way off in the distance we could see their flashes, which lighted up the sky with a red glare. Against the horizon we could see numerous observation balloons, or sausages as they are called. On the afternoon of the 3rd day's march I witnessed my first airplane being shelled. A thrill ran through me, and I gazed in awe. The airplane was making wide circles in the air, while little puffs of white smoke were bursting all around it. These puffs appeared like tiny balls of cotton, while after each burst could be heard a dull plop. The sergeant of my platoon informed us that it was a German aeroplane, and I wondered how he could tell from such a distance because the plane seemed like a little black speck in the sky. I expressed my doubt as to whether it was English, French, or German. With a look of contempt, he further informed us that the Allied anti-aircraft shells, when exploding, emitted white smoke, while the German shells gave forth black smoke, and, as he expressed it, "It must be an Allemande because our pom-poms are shelling, and I know our batteries are not off their bally-nappers, and are certainly not strafing our own planes. And another piece of advice, don't chuck your weight about until you've been up the line and learnt something." I immediately quit chucking my weight about, from that time on. Just before reaching reserve billets we were marching along, laughing, and singing one of Tommy's trench ditties, "I want to go home, I want to go home. I don't want to go to the trenches no more where sausages and whiz-bangs are galore. Take me over the sea where the Allemand can't get at me. Oh my, I don't want to die, I want to go home." When overhead came a swish through the air, rapidly followed by 3 others. Then about 200 yards to our left in a large field, 4 columns of black earth and smoke rose into the air, and the ground trembled from the report, the explosion of 4 German 5.9s or "coal boxes." A sharp whistle blast, immediately followed by 2 short ones, rang out from the head of our column. This was to take up artillery formation. We divided into small squads and went into the fields on the right and left of the road and crouched on the ground. No other shells followed this salvo. It was our first baptism by shell fire. From the waist up I was all enthusiasm, but from there down everything was missing. I thought I should die with fright. After a while we reformed into columns of 4s and proceeded on our way. About 5 that night we reached the ruined village of can't say, and I got my first sight of the awful destruction caused by German Kultur. Marching down the main street we came to the heart of the village and took up quarters in shell-proof cellars, shell-proof until hit by a shell. Shells were constantly whistling over the village and bursting in our rear, searching for our artillery. These cellars were cold, damp, and smelly, and overrun with large rats, big black fellows. Most of the Tommies slept with their overcoats over their faces. I did not. In the middle of the night I woke up in terror. The cold, clammy feet of a rat had passed over my face. I immediately smothered myself in my overcoat, but could not sleep for the rest of that night. Next evening we took over our sector of the line. In single file we wended our way through a zigzag communication trench, 6 inches deep with mud. This trench was called Whiskey Street. On our way up to the front line an occasional flare of bursting shrapnel would light up the sky, and we could hear the fragments slapping the ground above us on our right and left. Then a Fritz would traverse back and forth with his typewriter, or machine gun. The bullets made a sharp cracking noise overhead. The boy in front of me, named Prentice, crumpled up without a word. A piece of shell had gone through his shrapnel-proof helmet. I felt sick and weak. In about 30 minutes we reached the front line. It was dark as pitch. Every now and then a German star shell would pierce the blackness out in front with its silvery light. I was trembling all over and felt very lonely and afraid. All orders were given in whispers. The company we relieved filed past us and disappeared into the blackness of the communication trench leading to the rear. As they passed us, they whispered, "Best of luck, mates." I sat on the fire step of the trench with the rest of the men. In each traverse 2 of the older men had been put on guard with their heads sticking over the top, and with their eyes trying to pierce the blackness in no man's land. In this trench there were only 2 dugouts, and these were used by Lewis and Vickers, machine gunners, so it was the fire step for ours. Pretty soon it started to rain. We put on our macks, but they were not much protection. The rain trickled down our backs, and it was not long before we were wet and cold. How I passed that night I will never know, but without any unusual occurrence, dawn arrived. The word "Stand down" was passed along the line, and the sentries got down off the fire step. Pretty soon the rum issue came along, and it was a godsend. It warmed our chilled bodies and put new life into us. Then from the communication trenches came dixies or iron pots filled with steaming tea, which had 2 wooden stakes through their handles and were carried by 2 men. I filled my canteen and drank the hot tea without taking it from my lips. It was not long before I was asleep in the mud on the fire step. My ambition had been attained. I was in a front line trench on the Western Front, and oh, how I wished I were back in Jersey City. End of chapter.